You're listening to the Yoga Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Tiffany Cruikshank. Our podcast brings you information and resources to enhance the therapeutic effects of your practice based on a deeper understanding of anatomy, physiology, and the integration of modern science and research with traditional practices and experiences. Join me and my co-hosts, Rachel Land and Katya Barch, as we dive into all things yoga, research, and wellness.
Welcome back. We are here again with I think a really great topic. Hopefully the teachers will really appreciate. This was Rachel's idea, and a really great one, I think, talking about student questions and how to answer them, which can be challenging. And I think there's a lot to look at here that I think can be really valuable to teachers that we don't really get to talk to we talk to a little bit in trainings, but we don't really get to talk too much. And I think this will be a nice opportunity to do that.
I think because it's something that brings up so much anxiety for teachers, especially new teachers. Will I know the answer? Will I answer it right? If it's asked during class, will it interrupt the rhythm and the flow? What if it takes us into the weeds or takes us down this weird sort of side tangent? So I think it's something that for a lot of teachers just kind of brings up feelings. And hopefully today we can help people feel a little bit more comfortable about answering questions, and also maybe see some real positives that come up when students do ask for more information.
Right. And I think we were actually on an office hours call today, and we actually were talking about this. And I think, there's a few things that come up right away. And we do have some nice categories you've put this into, and we'll get into those next. But I think right away, the first thing when someone asks me a question, whether it's before or after class, and anyone who's done excuse me, anyone who's done a teacher training with us has probably heard me say this a lot. But the first thing for me when someone asks me a question is to put out the disclaimer that I'm not a magician. There's no cure-all. It's not necessarily what I say. What I usually say is just that without working with you one-on-one, it's hard to tell, regardless of what they've just asked me about. That could be anything. Insert any malady, any issue. My first caveat is it's hard to know without working with you one-on-one. And I think that does a couple of things. One, it lets them know that I'm not a magician. And it also lets them know that they have the opportunity to work with me one-on-one, without being like a sales pitch or a hard push for them to come in and see me. Like, it's a soft way of just kind of putting it out there and letting them know. And then the third thing it does is it also invites them into the journey. Like, the onus is not all on me to be a magician and be like, oh, your neck pain, here you go. Here's the magical thing. Because the reality is that no one can do that. No one can do that. No one can know the magical thing to cure your neck pain. They might make a great guess. They might maybe have a little bit of context of who you are and have maybe a more educated guess. Like, maybe they know that you're always running into class and looking at your phone and you seem really high stress. And so they maybe are giving you something more aimed at stress. I mean, maybe they see how you move in a practice, but even still, like, there's still so many different variances and variables and context. And there's just no way of knowing without knowing someone more. And so, so that's the first thing.
On that first thing, that I think is so important to say, because I do think I cannot be the only teacher who believed when I was a new teacher that was meant to be part of the skill set, that I should just be able to look at a student and some deep part of myself would know things about them, that I would recognize that because of their stride, their left psoas was tighter than their right, or they were holding on to some, difficult memory from their childhood. I really did feel that there was some expectation on me to have this magical X-ray vision. So I think it's really nice to put that out there right from the get-go. Nobody has that. Obviously, people who work with bodies a lot start to get instincts, but nobody's expecting you to have that magical X-ray vision. So let's put that out there right from the get-go. It's hard to know without getting a lot more information from you. But then there's the next part.
Yeah, I think you nailed it, right? And it's just like, you got to take away this magical mystery allure of like being able to guess the thing, because it's just not realistic. And we could talk about that. Like, why do those people who can like guess the thing, like what's the weird power or leverage they have over these people when they're talking to them and interacting. I'm like, and the guru effect, right? Of like me
Mm.
bestowing this down on you versus me being a guide for you. And that's really the route we take at yoga medicine is, I'm not the all-knowing guru. I'm not the all-knowing magician. Like I'm just a guide to help you find what's best for you. And so I think, again, starting with that caveat of like, without working with you one on one, here are some things you can. It's hard for me to know, but here are some things that you can try. And then I'm using a best guess scenario, and it really is just a guess. I might know a little from watching them in class if they come regularly, or they may have told me a little bit of information, or I might see them, interact with them a little bit, but still, until I've seen someone and worked with them one on one, not even just the first session, but over time,
Mhm.
you have to watch how they respond, how they react. So, the therapeutic process is a lot longer thing. So we're trying to go, yes, if you've worked with low back pain a lot, you can probably distill it down to a few common things that are helpful for a lot of people. I can definitely do that. You can write an article on it. In no way is it a cure all. In no way is it going to help everyone. But it's a really nice offering to have some of those things. I think it can kind of dumb things down a little bit when we have too many of those, like 3 poses for back pain and 3 poses for
Yeah.
this, and feel like a cure all. But it does give us a place to start. However, when someone's asking, it is a little bit of that kind of guessing. So it's like, these are the things that help you try it out, and then they get to join the conversation. And sometimes it's asking more questions, right? So what makes it better or worse? Are there certain poses? And if the context is, I'm only having this issue when I do X pose or X, Y, and Z poses, then, maybe it is just an alignment issue. If they're not having any other problems outside of the yoga mat, that's a context thing, right? So I'm creating a little bit of
Mm.
context. Is it just the pose? Is it just in their yoga practice? Is it outside in their life too? Which becomes more valuable information if they're having low back pain. Yeah, so that can tell me a lot. What makes it better? What makes it worse?
What I love
Um,
about this approach too is that instead of closing the door to the question, oh, it's low back pain, well, then really use your core when we fold forward or stand up. End of conversation. And if that doesn't help the student, then they kind of feel like, well, now they've got nowhere to go. So instead of shutting the door and saying, it's got to be just this one thing, there you go, you're fixed. And if they're not fixed, they're left with nowhere to, well, pay attention to. It could be, what makes it feel better, what makes it feel worse. Be aware of what happens when you're forward folding or twisting. Give your back some opportunities for movement, back out of anything that's painful. You're sort of offering them a few areas of inquiry that make them more open, more curious, more exploratory. And it also really crucially plants the seed of, I might have some control over this, or at least some input into this pain or sensation. There might be things that I can do that do make it feel better, or things that I could avoid that could potentially irritate it or make it feel worse. And so it brings the student into the journey, gets their brain engaged, gets them curious and paying attention. And to me, this, along with asking follow-up questions, is a great way to sort of start the conversation, not just between student and teacher, but between student and student's body, so that they start to get curious about, you're not the be all and end all of answering their question. They might be able to gather some information from their practice and their lives themselves.
yeah, and I think where both of those meet is really interesting. For example, I've had people who I can think of. Well, I actually had someone recently I was playing tennis with come up to me like, "Oh, well, they found out I taught yoga and wanted like a stretch for their low back pain." But it was obvious to me that I mean, maybe this person would have benefited from stretching, but just by watching them move, I think it really was more of a core stability issue. But, I'm also reading the situation when people are asking questions. Like, my gut feeling from the conversations and interactions with this person was they just wanted a stretch. They wanted a fix. They didn't like want to hear the core thing, but I think as it's our job to kind of put it out there. Like if this were a student, I probably would have said, well, it could be a stretching issue. And I've seen this a lot with students who are like really flexible. They just want that stretch. But it could also be, a core stability issue. I would experiment and see what's more helpful. Do you feel better after you do like a yin practice, or do you feel better after you do, more strength oriented practice? Even just general, obviously, we're not giving them specific things in that situation. So sometimes that can, again, like you said, guide them into the
Hmm.
conversation along with me having some background of just seeing them and and watching them move a little bit. We learn a lot just from that. Sometimes in a group class, though, we don't really like, especially if you've got big classes and there's always new people, we don't always get the opportunity to significantly notice patterns,
Mm.
in one person, because our job is to watch the class as a whole and really, look out for the flock, not the one.
Yeah. I do
So
love that approach though, because you're planting seeds that may not pay off today. That person really just wants to stretch. They're not interested in the core stability scenario, but you never know. 2 weeks down the track, a month down the track, 2 months down the track, if they're still experiencing this low back pain, maybe somebody else says something and those two things align and they start to get the feeling that maybe I need to dig a little bit deeper. This is how human beings work, I think, is you start to hear
yeah.
little snippets of information, you put them together, and that's how even somebody who seems to be set in one direction can start to become a little bit more open about changing course.
I completely agree. And it's one of those things too where I don't want to make what we do feel like a cure all, because I do think that can fall really flat if we
Mm.
attempt to give this person what they want instead of speaking from what I can clearly see I think is most helpful. Again, think. So I'm
Yeah.
leaving space for that, like, try it out. It's hard to tell. I don't work with you
Hmm.
one on one, but like you might actually find that core stability is more helpful, unless this is just a passing. So I always leave leeway for, like, I could be wrong and they could
Yeah.
sample something out and find something else, or if they're not engaged with it, like this person, I didn't get the sense they really wanted to do much because they like their investment was in tennis and that was it. I mean, it's so hard to get like adult tennis players to do anything other than tennis. And then they're all like, it's so hard on your body. And you're like, well, you don't do anything else, you don't stretch, you don't do like cross training, you don't do it, of course. But in this case, like, it was clear this person didn't want it, but I also don't want to make them feel guilty. I don't want to plant the
Ah,
seed that, like, if they don't do it, they're going to be lacking something and their
yeah.
back's going to get worse. I don't want to plant any of that negativity. Who knows? This could be something brief and fleeting. I don't know this person. So I also want to be careful with, like, the seeds I'm planting verbally with them too, that, are affecting them. Like you said, it might be planting seeds for maybe down the road. They'll hear it enough times and it'll be
Hmm.
meaningful.
Hmm.
Or maybe they'll just go home and do sit-ups, which anyone who's done yoga medicine, we know that core works a lot more than sit-ups, and sit-ups might not be that helpful.
Fortunately for me, because I hate sit-ups. Yeah, I love that. I love the open and spacious approach. You're giving something helpful, but you're giving it room to breathe. Because even if you have a theory, even if you have a hypothesis based on watching this person for, months worth of classes or weeks worth of tennis matches, you still don't really know. You never really know what's going on inside their skin. And there could always be something that you're not aware of, that they're not aware of. So it is always smart to leave space.
Yeah, and I've had so many cases where, it seemed things that seemed so straightforward, and then every once in a while, like, you've got that person that seems so straightforward and so obvious that just doesn't respond, and it
Yeah.
becomes something completely different, or the people who seem like, they're gonna take a long time to respond to have this magical response. So I try and leave prediction out of it. And we can predict a little bit, as in the sense that, like, if someone's been experiencing something for years or decades, it's probably going to be a pattern that takes a little time to rewrite. Um, but that doesn't mean they won't see changes along the way.
Hmm.
And someone
And
who's
people are
just had something
surprising.
that's brief and fleeting, or maybe they're only having it in a yoga pose, might be a really easy thing to work with. Or maybe not. Maybe we start opening up Pandora's box to realize that they just have completely shut off connection to their body awareness. And maybe there's a lot of things going on inside that need
Hmm.
to be addressed.
Yeah,
So
physical, emotional, energetic. You just don't know. People are surprising and complicated. Yeah.
yeah.
So I love that. You've started off with a quick and simple disclaimer. I'm not magical. It's hard to know without working with you one on one. But then you've offered some potentially helpful tips, a stretch, some core stability, something that gives them something to walk away with without sort of
And just to be clear, I'm
overpromising.
not saying they're not magical because, sometimes things are magical. But it is like, hey, it's hard to know without working with you one on one. But here's some things you can try. Like that's pretty much the
Mhm.
copy paste response. I always say, even on like office hours calls when people ask me about their, specific cases, whether they're asking about a student, it's hard for me to know without working with them one on one. I don't know. I don't know, but here's some things to try out. So
And what I like about that is that it also really invites them into getting more interested in the journey themselves instead of just looking for sort of problem fix. And we've, I think, all overheard conversations along those lines. My knee hurts. What should I do? Well, you need to engage your quads. And maybe that's helpful, but it's just as likely to be unhelpful depending on what's making their knee hurt. So it's a lot more sort of spacious and open than this problem equals this solution, end of conversation. Um, do
right.
you want
And
to?
those are like the catch-alls that we love on social media, right? It's just
Oh,
like,
yeah,
do this thing to
the
like
one
fix your
thing.
quad, fix your knee, or the one thing that will heal your back.
Yeah.
It's like, it makes a great social media. It's clickbait, right?
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
the
I've
reality
used
of
it
it, it
myself.
just, it, yeah. And hopefully
Yeah.
there's, like, it's great to get eyeballs, and then hopefully people engage with it, and then they learn more,
Mhm.
and there can be goodness behind that, but the reality is not that easy. So
Yeah. And I like that because it also takes a bit of pressure off the teacher to know that one thing and to come up with it on the fly. So we've sort of categorized the questions into some potential subcategories. And I think this conversation fits really neatly into the first one, which is probably the one that generates the most anxiety for teachers, which is around injuries and pain and medical conditions. My knee hurts when or my low back is sore. What should I do? Am I okay to do this class? Can I do yin if I have degenerative disc disease? I've just had surgery. Is it okay for me to do? All of that sort of basket of questions is probably where this format of answer fits the most neatly. And I also think this is a place where it's really important to say it is okay to, as a teacher, say that you don't know. Because you're not this person, you're also not their doctor, you don't know the details of what's going on with them. So it is okay to say, I don't know, have you been cleared for practice? Or they've mentioned some medical condition that you've never heard of. Oh, I haven't heard of that. Can you tell me what it is? It's okay to say, I don't know.
I agree. I think there's something really powerful about that. And as as a student or someone going to class, it honestly makes me trust them more, because
Hmm.
I really believe what they do say then, if they can. And I think it takes knowing a bit to also know what you don't know. And
Yes.
so I think it's a really powerful thing to say.
Yeah. And it can still leave the person with somewhere to go. I don't know the specifics of that illness or medical condition. It would be worth going back to your healthcare provider, showing them some of the poses that feel troublesome in yoga and getting their opinion. But for now, for today, you could use pain as a guide. Just move slowly back out of anything that isn't feeling right for you. Take your time. Don't hesitate to stop and take a break if you'd like to. You'd be surprised at the benefits that you can get from just down regulating your nervous system and being in your body and connecting to your breathing. So don't hesitate to take a break, and we can check back at the end to see how you feel. So it doesn't have to be the end of the conversation. Gosh, I don't know. Have fun. Bye. You can still create that as an open door to more conversation. You can still invite them to get curious and pay attention. Notice which poses or practices are feeling helpful. Go slowly so that you can back out if you'd like to. And you can use that to kind of start a longer conversation. But it is important to say, I think, it's okay not to know. It's okay not to have heard of that muscle or medical condition or
Mhm.
surgical procedure, or it's all okay. You're just a yoga teacher.
Well, and sometimes I do think it's important to say I don't know. Again, I think it builds trust and confidence in your work as a teacher to be able to say that. I also think sometimes it's just a matter of referring them to their doctor, and there's not a lot of great evidence behind contraindications and safety for most of yoga practices. And so, I usually relate it to, especially for more like active practices, vinyasa, hatha, things like that. Are they cleared for exercise? For yin and like yin, are they cleared for stretching? For MFR, are they cleared for massage? I mean, those are close enough that
Mm.
we can gather kind of the main contraindications. If someone has a serious medical issue, or they've had a recent surgery, or something weird that maybe you've never heard of, and maybe some of us healthcare providers. I mean, if you go through medical school, I went through Chinese medicine 20 some years ago, and things are always updating, changing, and so like Ehlers-Danlos is like we're learning about it, things like
Mhm.
that, and so we may not always be familiar with it, and that's okay. But I would say referring them back to their doctor for medical issues, for like contraindications. Is it okay to do this for this? But then you can also break it down, like you said. Well, we had someone that you were mentioning who said, I think it was their student who loves
Mhm.
yin, who does yin regularly, who has degenerative disc and osteoarthritis,
Mhm.
I think, were the two main things. And she was like, "Is it okay for her to do yin?" And it's like, well, knowing what we know about those two are very familiar diagnosis. And if you're not familiar with those, you can Google them and learn a bit. Fairly degenerative, both of them, though I hate that word. Um, but what's, I think, more interesting is like, is this person benefiting from yin? It's not a
Yes.
it's not a complete contraindication to stretch with osteoarthritis or degenerative disc disease. But, is that the most helpful thing for them? Is it getting them where they need to go? So we ended up having this conversation of like, well, is it helping? Are they feeling better or worse from the yin practice? Like right after, but also like, are their symptoms over time getting better or worse? Like, is yin the complete answer to all of their maladies? And usually, like in most things, it's usually not just one thing that is the magical cure all. I think that's the cool thing about yoga is we have a diverse set of tools that can work with different layers of the person, the physiological layer, the biomechanical layer, the all the different layers, energetic, emotional.
Mm.
And so it's finding kind of that right layer. But yeah, asking more questions. So it was ultimately, and I think the response was that they liked yin, and it wasn't necessarily making them feel worse, but it wasn't necessarily helping the symptoms they were have feel better. And so
Yeah,
we
and I
talked
guess
about other ways.
I love that you brought up the layers because that's what was really coming to my mind in that specific scenario was, okay, if they only had time for one organized movement session a week, would yin be the one that I would put top of list? It probably wouldn't be, but I'm not that person. I'm not living in their life. Maybe their predominant concern is actually not the degenerative disc disease or osteoarthritis, but stress and overwhelm. And this, 60 minutes of yin is this soothing balm for their nervous system. Maybe that is the most helpful thing they could be doing for the whole person.
Or maybe they're postmenopausal and, we have more of the stiffer collagen 1 postmenopausally. Maybe they're having mobility issues and wanting to maintain mobility because of the osteoarthritis and the degenerative disc. And that might actually be a really great viable option, if it's not
Mhm.
pain, because I can have both of those conditions and have no pain.
Mhm.
It's possible to have both of those, degenerative disc and osteoarthritis, and not have pain. There have been large scale studies that have shown, people who have no pain, and there's a lot of images that on the imaging, they find a lot of degeneration and osteoarthritis anyways. And so, you know, when I look at it, who is this person? Is it helping? I have to ask questions.
Yeah, yeah. Because usually the quickest answer is it depends, which is a really unhelpful answer. And so when you dive into it in a little bit more detail, it's like, what are they looking for? And what benefits are they receiving as a whole person, not just as a bundle of medical conditions attached to a pair of legs, but as a whole person?
Which we're laughing at because I feel like that's always my cliche when people ask me answers. And they're like, well, it depends.
It
Ask me
depends,
questions and
but
it
it does.
depends. It does. I mean, we're all so unique. I mean, it's the beauty of being human. We're all so individual and so unique. And, it's why studies on identical twins can be interesting because you have a great, well, usually just two patient cohort, but you have an interesting study to look at people who are identical because there's so many, you know, there's so much context to what influences us that it's hard to really point a finger to exactly what's doing the thing. So
Yeah. So you can still use the format that we talked about earlier of starting with your disclaimer of it's hard to know without more information or working with this person one on one. But generally speaking, they might benefit from some strength and joint stability work. They might benefit from some gentle movement to kind of lubricate the joints. But what are they experiencing from yin? What draws them there? What do they find benefit from it? What keeps them coming back to yin as opposed to other practices? Well, maybe that's what they need most right now as a whole person. Yeah, I love that. And
and I
the
like
other
that
thing
you
that,
mentioned too time because, a lot of times that's all the time they have and they're spending it
yeah,
all on yin and I need to kind of decide, what's going to be most valuable for my time.
yeah, I mean, the idea is that, of course, in a perfect world, there'd be a list of 38 things that we do every single day. But unfortunately, we also have to make a living and keep our
That sounds
mortgage paid. No,
overwhelming.
yeah, it's probably not 38. If you talk to every single professional, it would probably be 138 things we were supposed to do
Yes.
every day. But
It
anyway,
just sounds awful. Like we all brush our teeth and we don't think of that. But to think about, yeah, there is always this longer and longer list of things you, in quotes,
should be
have to
doing.
do.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one aspect of answering that question about injuries, pain, discomfort, medical conditions. The other thing that I wanted to say, if somebody comes up to me at the beginning of the class, which they do pretty much every class I teach, and say, just FYI, tweaked my back gardening on the weekend. So if I look a little odd, if I'm doing my own thing, that's why. And in that kind of scenario, I'll say, great, thanks for letting me know. Obviously, the practice is yours to do with what you wish, do the things that feel helpful, leave out the things that don't. But I will also cast my mind forward to the sequence I'm planning to teach. And if I can think of anything that's potentially challenging, I might mention it. I do have a series of twists coming up today, might feel fine, but if it doesn't, you could just keep a neutral spine when the rest of the class is twisting. And I might quickly show them a couple of the poses that I'm planning to teach and say, you can, of course, do it if it feels fine, but you might stay in tabletop or you might stay in crescent lunge and not add the twist. So just do the things that feel right, leave out the things that don't. Make sure you walk out of the room feeling at least as good as you did when you came in. So that's one other tip for group classes. Have a quick think through your sequence. And if there's anything that kind of flashes a warning light in your mind of this might be challenging for somebody with low back pain, or this could be an issue for somebody with knee pain, it might prompt more questions.
Yeah. Yeah. And as best you can, I think
Yeah, you're never going to remember it
empowering them to
perfectly.
be empowering them to be their own best teacher because no one else is going to know what's going on in their body but them and giving them that power to do what feels best and I would say almost like to leave better feeling better than you came in.
I don't want to overpromise. I'm very careful because, in New
It's not a
Zealand,
promise. But you're setting their expectations pretty low. I
I
don't
did
know.
say at
Now we're
least
talking about
as good.
nuance.
At least as good as you did when you came in. I don't want to overpromise, but at least as good. And what I did want to really flag about this is there's a potential upside from all these questions, which is it's the perfect opportunity to talk about the fact that you do work with people one-on-one, or that you do have a series of online classes on low back pain, or that you do have a series of online classes on knee pain. It's an opportunity to connect students with things that they could find helpful in a way that's really natural and organic.
And honestly, I'll add to that because it's impossible for every teacher to have all of those resources online.
Yeah,
We might happen
whatever
to
the
have the thing
resources
they
you
need,
have.
but I think even if it's not a resource you have, I think pointing them in a direction, maybe that's a therapist, who's great with knees
Yes.
for some reason. Maybe that's another yoga teacher who has a series of classes. Maybe it's yoga medicine online, whatever that is. I think what you'll find, I think we tend to have this scarcity mentality as a yoga teacher that we want to keep all of our students and even as healthcare providers we want to do everything ourselves but one thing I've found and everyone that I've mentored and worked with has also found over the decades is that the more I can refer people out and get them in the right place in a timely manner, I will get so much more back to me. They'll be referring
Mhm.
people to me because now they trust and respect my opinion. They know I'm going to get people in the right place. They know I'm not going to pretend like I can do everything when I can't. And we all thrive off of that. So like, let go of the scarcity mentality that has to be all your stuff, and it can
Mhm.
also be just pointing them to a modality that that's helped you, or that's helped a friend or a student, or um, and that can also be done in conjunction with the work you're doing with them. Like if you're referring them out to an acupuncturist or a physical therapist or something, a lot of times we can work in conjunction, or maybe they go and do like the really intense work with them and then come back and do the finishing stuff because it's never really complete usually um, in a lot of those sectors. So
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I had two items on my potential plus side. One was it's an opportunity to talk about offerings that you have if you have them. The other one is it's a really potent reminder to build a network of resources, whether that's places that you're referring people or people that you're referring people to, because you'll never be great at everything. You'll never be experienced and expert in everything. And the more places you have to refer people, the more helpful you'll be. And that abundance mentality that you were speaking about is real. When you're helpful to people, they tend to refer other people to you or think of you positively. It creates a really different relationship in your community.
or come back to you for something else, or maybe
Sure.
for the
Send
remnants
somebody
of the
else
thing
to
they're
you.
working with.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I read your mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maybe you did. So that was one really big bucket of questions around pain, discomfort, injury, medical condition. The next big bucket of questions that I tend to come across are those around alignment. Like, should my knee be here or here? Should my foot point this
Mm.
way or that way? Is it more advanced for me to have my arms straight or my elbows bent? And this to me is another kind of category of questions where maybe it's still hard to say without more information. Maybe you have an idea of what the textbook says, but it does open up the opportunity to talk about, well, in the textbook, it's done with the back foot turned out, but today we're playing with turning the back foot in a little bit to see how that feels. It can again be an opportunity to open up more less closed-minded conversations and to open up that more exploratory sort of mindset.
Yeah, or like traditionally, we turn that back foot in 45
Mhm.
degrees, but everyone's bones are a little different. So you might find that experimenting a little in or out, giving them some leeway to experiment, I think is helpful. Um, Safely, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, and it requires again that giving them something helpful, y- traditionally, or textbook says, or normal alignment is, but also leaving space for the mystery because we can't see their skeleton. We don't know their proportions or where their joints are situated or, how their muscles activate around those joints. So it does leave space for everyone's a little bit different and feel free to experiment. Or today in class, we've been focusing on this way to see how it feels. Doesn't mean this is the be all and end all, but today we're being curious about that back foot being at 30 degrees or 60 degrees.
And I think what's interesting about this question too is usually because you could ask that question about every nuance of every pose, like you could dissect alignment down to every little thing. A lot of times, the reason they zoom in on a thing usually is because they have something going on in that area, or maybe they had something there, or they're trying to prevent something there, or there's usually some underlying reason. So sometimes
More
digging
questions?
into that can be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So today we were focusing on X. Why do you ask? Could be as simple as that.
Or how does it feel for you? A lot of
Mhm.
times that'll bring up the questions if they have it. So
Yeah, what I love about this conversation when I have time is when I get questions around real specificities of alignment, or that one around is it more advanced to do X or Y? Is it harder to do X or Y? If I have time, I love to break that conversation down to say, well, it depends. Option A requires quite a bit more flexibility in the back, say, but option B requires a lot more strength in the back muscles. So, depending on what you're looking for, One's not better than the other, one's not harder than the other. It just depends on what your challenges are and what goals you're working towards. So it gives me opportunities to chip away at that kind of hierarchical mindset that I really dislike in yoga practice, to remind people that it is, there's room to be a lot more interested and curious than just, is this better? Is this better? Is this harder? Is this harder?
I completely agree. I feel like I rarely get that one anymore, but I agree, and I think it depends is a lot of times that answer too, and
I
it
actually
also
still get
shows
that one a
them
surprising
that
amount.
really? It shows
Yeah.
them too that there's not like this right or wrong way to do
Yes.
the practice. I feel like there is still a lot of that ingrained in students of like, am I doing it right? Is
Yes.
this the right or the wrong way? That, there's one way to do triangle that's right and one way that's wrong.
Yes.
And I mean, the reality is that even the physical practice is fairly new in terms of like yoga itself. And even the names of the postures are all very new. And we're evolving the practice to suit our needs, and I think as modern day yogis we are applying it through a lens of anatomy and physiology, and also the context of who this person is we're working with, and trying it on for size to see what is most helpful for the person. And sometimes that might be a triangle pose where I'm taking my hand all the way down to the floor and letting the pelvis
Mhm.
rotate forward a little bit, and others it might be keeping the pelvis squared exactly to the side long edge of your mat and staying up much higher and focusing
Mhm.
on those lateral stabilizers, and
Yeah, but which one's right,
versus
Tiffany?
and there, and it's just different. And you could try it out yourself, right? If you come
Mhm.
down, you can feel it more in that inner hamstring versus staying up higher and feeling more of the stability, and then there's a million nuances in between. And so, and as a teacher, don't get overwhelmed by that because you don't need to know all of that. I would say if you feel like, oh gosh, how would I know what the difference is between these different variations? Well, one, you don't need to have all those answers on the spot, but two, you can also just feel it yourself. I
Mhm.
think sometimes we overly analyze anatomy in our brains by like origin and insertion and action and whatnot. And
Yeah.
it's more complex and more nuanced than that. But if you come into a pose and you experiment, and unlike someone like me, might come in triangle pose and put my hand on the floor and feel a lot, and someone else might come into it who's very really flexible and feel nothing and be like, well, and so
Yeah.
it is also going to be different from person to person, but there are some
Yes.
commonalities. And so I think just it depends on what
Yes.
your goal is and what your purpose is. I think
Yeah.
it's a big
So
one.
I love that this one opens up the conversation around there isn't necessarily a right way or a wrong way or an advanced way or a beginner way, but they're just different. And you might have an experience in your body. I taught it this way today because I really wanted you to feel the oblique abdominals on the top side of the torso working in triangle. But what did you feel? And that again sets you free from
Mm,
being the oracle of all knowledge and invites the student back into the experience. Well, I didn't feel the top side of my body so much. I really felt my back leg. Oh, great. Well, that's really interesting. That gives you something to explore in your practice. So again, there isn't a right and wrong way. You don't get caught out by not having the answer. There's room for people's experience to be different.
I love that. And I think it also brings me to another point, which I find a lot is, when someone comes up to you and says something like, maybe you did a class focused on something specific and they really loved it. It was so helpful, and you can also cue them into, well, was there one thing in particular? Was it just the whole class? Because if there are things that they could tap into in another class, like maybe we focused on chaturanga alignment. Like you could definitely focus on that, come back to that, in other classes. If there are, awareness in the body that they could come back to, then I give them a really powerful tool because they can potentially apply that in many practices and start to kind of like shift and rewire how their body
Mm.
relates to itself.
And on the flip side, they come to you and say, you were teaching a variation today that I hated. That again is the teacher's nightmare, but that's still really useful information for the student. And I think it's a great reminder for us as teachers to hold what we're offering in a really loose grip. Like my day is not made by the person coming to me and saying that thing you did in chaturanga changed my life, but it's also not ruined by the person who says that thing you did in chaturanga didn't work for me. It's like, okay, interesting. What do you prefer? You've learned something about your practice that you can take into different classes now. Great. Either way, great.
Right? Or like the person who, usually students are nice about this, but they might jokingly be like, "Oh, those hamstrings, it was painful," or, say something like that. And it's like, it's also a great moment to say, I'm wow, I love finding things that are really challenging. I love finding those blind spots, and being able to
Yeah.
find something I can work with and kind of turn it
Yeah.
around too. And I think it changes how we relate to that negativity too, and to the challenges. Instead of being something we want to like push away, we instead want to pull them towards us and, befriend them.
And
Be
either
curious.
way, your job isn't to confirm every bias that that student has. It's to invite them into an experience of exploration and curiosity. And as teachers, I think ideally we want to have a little bit of space around our responses to their responses of not just they loved it, great, I'm a good person. They hated it, oh no, I'm a bad person. But either way, I've given them some information, and that's my job as a teacher. Some
Yeah, I
equanimity there.
completely agree. I
And the plus
completely
side of
agree.
this, yeah, this category of questions, as well as training you for a little bit more equanimity as a teacher, is this is great insight into what your students are curious about, what questions they want answered, where they'd like more information. And this might dictate where you focus future classes or where you focus future social media posts or newsletters that you're writing or workshops or masterclasses that you teach. If you feel like you're getting repeat questions, that's a really clear sign that your student population are curious about something and looking for more information. So if you're in that constant state of, God, what do I put out next? What information do people want me to provide? That's a really helpful little tip of what they're looking for.
Yeah, I agree. Most of my content that I create is based on either patients that I've worked with or students or my own body
Yeah,
or
your own
people I come in
questions.
contact with. Yeah. So the last two I think are like, I feel like those are the two biggest categories of questions and kind of the bulk of a lot of it. And the last two are kind of smaller, but I think also
Mhm.
really interesting. And one of them is questions around teaching choices.
Mhm. Yeah, I love this one because these are questions that I also get from students, and this is one category where I feel like saying I don't know is probably not the right answer. I think you do need to have some deliberation, some intention around your teaching choices. So I'm thinking specifically about examples like you used to finish classes with namaste and now you don't anymore. How come? Or Tina does massages in Shavasana and you don't. How come? Students asking you around the choices that you make as a teacher. And ideally, there, I think the answer wouldn't be, oh, I don't know. I just kind of stopped last Tuesday. And this is your opportunity to say, look, not all students and not all teachers are open to touch, especially here in a forum where there's not much chance for conversation or consent to be given. And I've decided that for the moment, I'm not doing hands-on adjusts, or I've been learning a bit more about the history and politics and philosophy of yoga practice. There are some questions around whether namaste is an appropriate finish to a class. So at the moment, I'm not saying it, and I'm kind of testing out how that feels and what I could say instead to convey what I want to close the class.
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be a lot of questions around this, and it really comes down to this is my opportunity as a teacher to clarify my purpose and to
Mm,
also let my student who's asking the question know that my content really is purpose driven, even if that purpose is just to create a well-rounded practice. There's something I think really supportive about feeling like you're going to a purposeful class,
mm,
um, even if it's not the exact thing that maybe you were like, oh, my hips, and it ends up being a neck or whatever, or a non-physical theme. And
mhm.
we can all benefit. I think in group classes you can't be specific to the individual, that's impossible, but having that purpose feels much more supportive, and it feels like there's a plan and some direction. And I think knowing that as a student is important. And so, however you clarify that, the answer to these questions are really more open ended, and, clarifying who you are as a teacher and what your purpose is. And, like for me, I used to love doing massages and shavasana, and I don't anymore because I think it's too distracting. I want people to be focused internally on
Mm.
themselves. And I think it can be a distraction from that internal experience. There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's cool. I mean,
Yeah.
it's great if you enjoy it, and some teachers love it, and that can be a wonderful experience. But
And that's something that I wanted to point out is I do think it's a good idea here to leave your answers really open, that you're sort of inviting students into the fact that you're not a finished product, that you are still thinking things through and working on yourself and what you offer to the world. And that may change in the future. It might have been different in the past, but right now, this is what you're working with. And that also leaves space for Tina to be doing massages in shavasana and for that to feel fine, because maybe this person loves the shoulder massage in shavasana from Tina. That's okay too. It's not that
yeah,
you're setting a standard for every human being on the planet. You're just giving them an insight into what you're working on or working through right now. And I think that's another really good way to create a relationship with your students that's a bit more whole and authentic. This isn't a performance that I've curated, this isn't a script I've written. I'm still thinking things through myself, and I'm not finished yet. So there'll be things that change as I learn more and as I grow and develop, because I'm a
I think
person too.
I think it's always important to be positive because we've all enjoyed. I think if you've practiced long enough, we've all enjoyed many different facets of the practice, and there have been times when we've enjoyed maybe the massage and shavasana, or music, or hot rooms, or yin,
Yeah.
or something more mellow or more advanced, or we go through that. And I think this is the beauty of yoga, is that it can um, support us, throughout the changes in our lives. And hopefully we do change how we experience the yoga practice in a way that suits us as we change and shift through the decades of our lives. And so it's not up to me to judge whether someone should have music or not, or massage or not, or this or not. But for me, it's this. And that's great for people who love those other things. Honestly, I mean, the hot classes with music are usually like the gateway drug anyways. They usually end up later on. They dig deeper, they find other things, and or maybe they stay in that forever. Who knows? That's
Hmm.
fine too. I
Yeah.
just hope
Yeah.
everyone gets what they need, and there's no judgment around what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And then the last category of questions were the kind of tangential ones that might feel unrelated to what you're teaching in the moment. I had an example in one of my yin classes. Somebody piped up during a stretch and said, "Is this stretching going to make my cellulite worse?" And I was not prepared to answer that question. It was not a question I had ever asked myself in yin or any other stretch, or something like, should I be looking down or forward or up here? So I think you're just looking for a response that's kind of quick there, that keeps the flow of the class going and keeps people focused on your core intention, ideally without making them feel bad. I say ideally
Yeah.
because I don't know that I've always achieved that aim, but ideally without making them feel bad. Like, I don't
Yeah.
think so, but there's plenty of other benefits to stretching. We actually know about some benefits to stretching and arterial mobility and heart health. So plenty of other reasons aside from your cellulite. Or for the purposes of today, I don't mind whether you look down or forward or up. You just choose the one that feels the best for you, and then keep the focus
Yeah.
moving on.
Exactly. Yes. I think you answered that one perfectly.
Yeah, not in real time. In real time, I was like, "What? What? Who cares? Who cares about cellulite? What are you talking about?" But no, in reflection, in hindsight, I would have answered it quite differently.
Right. And I think we always have to leave space for, like, I feel the same. And I'm like, really? but
That's what you're
but
thinking about right
like
now.
that is meaningful to some people. And
Yeah.
to put shame on them for feeling that way is not a good thing. I think it's just a human experience to question things like that. And there's
Mhm.
nothing wrong with that. I the way you answered it was perfect, and I think a part of it is, like you said, that sometimes these topics can kind of like take us out of the experience, and hopefully these people who are asking strange questions like that in the middle of class start to like. I assume a lot of times they're new to yoga and maybe uncomfortable dropping in or kind of listening and tuning into their body maybe, and I think a lot of times those kind of things start to drift to the wayside as they really drop into their own body and their own experience. And um, but they still come up sometimes, and our job as a teacher is to try and keep the flow of class and
Mm.
maintain a certain kind of maybe introspective environment sometimes, maybe not in some
Mm.
classes, but yeah, and so sometimes it's just being succinct and maybe even offering to chat after class, maybe not.
Yeah.
I think you answered it enough there, but
But maybe. Yeah, and I think the thing about questions is that they are potentially uncomfortable because they're breaking the mold between, teacher broadcasting and student receiving. And for me, any opportunity to break that mold is potentially useful because it means that rather than the student just going through the motions, there's some level of mental engagement there. They're curious, things are coming up that give us an opportunity to have a conversation beyond just broadcast and receiver, where I might be able to offer a little seed that could pay off later or plant something for them to investigate in their practice. So, as uncomfortable as questions can potentially be, I think there are huge upsides to opening up a deeper and a more conversational relationship with students and giving you places to go a little deeper to sort of investigate further or invite them to do that. So to me, the potential discomfort is really worth the payoff.
yeah, I mean, I think I agree. I do think sometimes in a class, like there are a lot of classes where I am trying to create a mood and an environment, and questions can be obtrusive to that. It can impact that and then change the atmosphere and environment for other people. But yes, I agree. Obviously, we definitely want people to be asking questions and interacting. And, sometimes that's usually, at least in my experience, a lot more appropriate before or after class, which
Yeah.
might be just a great way to, let them know, hey, let's chat after class. It's a
Yeah.
longer topic. But I agree, like inviting them into that conversation. It's not always comfortable and we don't have to know all the answers. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's just inviting them back to their doctor. And sometimes it's asking more questions, or inviting them into the inquiry to do a little bit of research and see what helps themselves. But I think it opens up a really important connection between teacher and student. And I think that's a really important part of the process.
Yeah, I agree that it's important to have some strategies to keep the pace of the class going. I love that question. I'd love to talk to you about it further after class. For now, let's focus on and then you carry on. So if we kind of draw it all together and summarize, context is really important. So whether they're asking you before or after class, it's really helpful to know a little bit about what information they're trying to glean from you, what situation is prompting the question. That might involve more questions, that might involve you referring them back to their healthcare provider. It's okay to say that you don't know. It's okay to say that's not something you're experienced with, but for the general purposes of today, pay attention to pain, back out of anything that doesn't feel great, go slowly so you've got time to notice your responses. Um, for the questions where it's a little bit more about your intention and your philosophy as a teacher, I do think it's a good idea to have an answer and to know your why and to be able to communicate that in a way that leaves space for other people to make different choices. And there are always the random questions that pop up that you want to acknowledge and then keep the flow of class moving. And either way, it can be a great way to open up more detailed conversations with your students, whether that's in person or the development of another class or class series or workshop or social media post or newsletter or a prompt for you to build a more robust referral network. It can all be a way to become a better and more informed and more helpful teacher.
And I think we mentioned this already, but I would just add to this that like I never want to make someone feel stupid for asking a question or shame them for asking a question. I think and even though, in your head, you might be thinking, oh, wow, I can't believe they don't know this. I mean, to us, it seems so obvious sometimes. If we live in this world, some of these things become so, you know, day to day for us. But, I think, again, we don't know something until we learn it, and we have to learn at
Mhm.
some point. And so just keeping that in your mind that, I always want to welcome those questions so that they can learn and find what's helpful. And we can do our best to help them along this journey.
I love that. Anything else that you want to say to wrap up the student question conversation?
No, I think that was great. It's an important one to think of, to talk about, because I think our language and interactions are a really important and meaningful part of the work we do and
Mhm.
don't get enough attention. And so going through some of those dialogues, I think, is hopefully really helpful for people. So thanks, Rachel.
Thank
Thanks for
you.
bringing the great topic.
Woohoo! Thanks, Tiffany.
All right. Well, we will see you next time. Thanks for joining us. Let us know your thoughts, any questions, any comments, and we will
Mm,
see you next time.
bye.
Thanks for listening to Yoga Medicine. If you like the show, please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you got something out of this episode, please spread the word and share it with a friend. You can find more information, articles, trainings, and classes at yogamedicine.com, or check us out on social media as Yoga Medicine. You can also email us at info@yogamedicine.com. Thank you for being a part of our Yoga Medicine community. We look forward to seeing you again. The content of this podcast is not medical advice and is not meant to replace medical care. Please consult your healthcare provider to determine what is best for your unique healthcare needs.